My undead girlfriend has trust issues. Written by Death Valley. When I met Ava, I knew she was the perfect match for me. We met in a park quite a while ago when I decided to go for an early morning jog. Ava was sitting on a bench, eyes glued to her phone. At the time, I wasn't very fit, so after a few laps, I plonked myself down next to her. She looked up and smiled at me, and I hesitantly smiled back. We got to talking, and after a while, we exchanged numbers. I told her that I lived locally and found out that she did as well. We even found out that we had the same favorite food, pizza. We chatted for a while, and it seemed like we had hit it off. We texted each other later that day and arranged a date in the town. Ever since then, we've been together, girlfriend and boyfriend. Before her, I'd never dated anyone, and neither had she, so I always joked that our relationship was fate. But not everything in our relationship is perfect. For one, Ava has serious trust issues. I found this out on one of our first dates, when I tried to hold her hand. However, I didn't manage to, as Ava jerked her hand away from me like I was poisonous. "Oh, Jim, I forgot to tell you, I don't really like being touched," she said. I didn't think that that was too odd, as I knew a lot of people who didn't like physical affection. This complicated our relationship slightly, as I couldn't kiss or hug her, but other than that, we were just like any couple. There have been occasions where I'd forget that she didn't like it and try to touch her, but she was too quick. For someone who always looked half dead, I was surprised that she had so much energy. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Ava isn't exactly very healthy. She's very thin, and there are days where I can almost see her bones through her translucent skin. Her long black hair falls loosely in greasy strands, and the dark circles under her eyes make her look like a panda. And then there are her eyes themselves. They are dark hollows, void of emotion or anything human. Ava's skin is so white it looks almost green. If you met her at night, you would think that she was a corpse. I've nagged her to go and see a doctor, but she refuses. I'm hoping that this is just a seasonal thing, and maybe she'll get better when the summer starts again. But that is a long way away yet. It's early November, and the advancing cold weather probably won't help. Still, I love her no matter what. We're soulmates after all. This was meant to be. Another thing that I hate about Ava is how secretive she is. About everything. I try to tell her that she can trust me, we're dating after all. But she doesn't listen. She gets so mad when I try and question her. I don't know what she does in the time between our dates. I just assume that she's busy with work and I ignore it. One time, however, my friend Mark and I were walking through the neighborhood when we saw Ava in a graveyard. She was there with another guy, and trust me when I say, I've never seen two people who look so alike yet so different at the same time. This guy had the exact same complexion as her, the same hollow cheeks and dead eyes, but his face structure was completely different, and while she was long and lanky, he was short and stocky. When I saw him, I stumbled backwards, and I must have made quite a racket, as his glassy eyes stopped fixating on Ava and stared directly at me. Well, that was it. I grabbed Mark's arm and ran. I didn't want Ava to know that we'd been spying on her. I tried indirectly questioning her over dinner, but she completely denied all of it. So, you can imagine my surprise when she showed up at my flat yesterday and told me that we were going to her parents' house. She seemed oddly nervous and quite jittery. I agreed to go, and we set off on foot to their place. It was quite dark outside. There was no moonlight that night, which meant that the neighborhood was shrouded in darkness. It was also quite cold, and I shivered as I pulled my coat tighter around me. Ava didn't seem to feel the cold, though, as she strode on without acknowledging it. We walked in the dark for about 15 minutes before Ava stopped and said, "This is the place." She had stopped at the local cemetery, the one where I'd seen her talking to her doppelganger. I stared at it for a minute before asking, "Is this where your parents live?" "Yes," she said quietly, walking over to a corner of the cemetery. I assumed that they were dead. "I'm sorry," I called after her, racing to keep up. "Oh, don't be," she smiled. "Tonight, we're going to bring them back. At least we're going to bring Mom back. Dad is already here." She turned around, and there stood the short guy from a while back. He had a sack slung over his shoulder, big enough for a human. But I didn't dare question it. In the gloom, he looked more corpse-like than ever. And when he smiled, you could see his rotting teeth. My eyes almost popped out of their sockets. "He's your dad?" "That's right," she confirmed. "I brought him back just a few weeks ago, when you and your friend just happened to be passing by us." Her words were laced with venom, and I felt waves of guilt crashing over me. How can you bring back the dead?" I asked. Ava smiled sweetly, chuckling at my ignorance. "You'll see. Dig." She handed me a shovel and nudged me towards her mother's grave. What? You want me to?" She nodded. I sighed, and I plunged my shovel into the ground. I could feel their empty eyes boring into me as I dug, making me feel uncomfortable. It didn't look like I had much choice in the matter. After 30 minutes of digging, I had dug quite a big hole, but it wasn't deep enough. The corpse of Ava's mother still lay somewhere far below. This was going to be exhausting work. "This is crazy," I exclaimed, throwing down my shovel. "You can't make me do this." Ava just rolled her eyes. "Dad, I think he needs some more motivation." Ava's dad ripped open the sack that he had been carrying and shook it, and out tumbled Mark. He had been bound and gagged, and there was a blindfold over his eyes so he couldn't see anything. "Mark, what did they do to you?" I cried, running over to him. A bony hand shot out and flung me to the ground. I knew it was Ava's dad, as Ava hated being touched. "If you stop digging, the boy dies," he growled, shaking his fist at me. I tried to scream, but he clamped a fist over my mouth. The smell of rotting flesh made my eyes water. "Dig," he said, squeezing Mark's throat. I picked up the shovel and I began digging faster. Dirt flew everywhere as I dug, sprinkling the graveyard in soil. Occasionally I would stop, but not for long, as Ava's dad would remind me why I was digging. Hours passed. 2 hours, 3 hours. Finally, my shovel hit something. I unearthed it, and I saw it was a hand. A withered, green hand. I started feeling nauseous, and I stopped digging. "Is this enough?" I asked, praying that it would be. "Just a little more, Jim. You're doing great." Ava beamed. The compliment was enough. I dug slightly deeper and exposed the torso. "That'll be fine, Jim." A deep voice behind me made me jump. Ava's dad had snuck up behind me while I was digging. "Let me take it from here." He approached the body and crouched down beside it. In one single movement, he had ripped off a whole chunk of flesh. He chewed it and grinned contentedly, opening his mouth so that I could see the grotesque thing that he was eating. "Is this all I did this for?" I said, wrinkling up my nose, repulsed. I felt like I was going to vomit. Well, no, not exactly, Ava's dad said. Haven't you ever watched a horror movie, my boy? Don't you know what happens next? A light switch flicked on in my brain. Everything made so much sense now. You're zombies, I said. This was the reason why Ava didn't want to touch me. The reason why she looked half dead. She was dead. They were dead. They were zombies. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, to escape while I still could. But the rational side of me told me that this couldn't be real. They can't be zombies, I thought to myself. Zombies aren't real. They're just some made-up story to scare kids. Ava seemed to know what I was thinking as she smirked and said, "Want proof?" Before I could answer, she strode over to Mark and ripped him to shreds. I watched in frozen horror, mesmerized as she tore my best friend apart and chowed down on his flesh. It seemed like pizza wasn't her favorite food after all. The first good meal I've had in a long time, she sighed. It's a pity he wasn't dead. He would have tasted so much better. I stared at her in disbelief. What? She snapped, noticing me. Nothing, I muttered. I sidled back over to the body of Ava's mom. So, what happens next? Oh, to her? Ava said, and I nodded. Over the next 24 hours, my mom's heart will start beating. The zombie venom will start flowing around her body, and her brain will be shocked into working again. So basically, she'll become an animated corpse. A zombie. Ava said conversationally, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Like you, I said, watching her in distaste. Yes, like me, and like Dad. And you too, if you just let me. She pounced on me, and I remember trying to shake her off. The last thing that I saw were her rotting teeth before she plunged them into my flesh, and I blacked out. Right now, as I'm typing this, I am bound to my bed. My body throbs with pain, and I've been throwing up every few minutes. I'm a sticky mess, sweat sticking my hair to my forehead. Ava says that my skin has turned gray and that I'm beginning to reek of death. I think that means it will all be over soon. At least, I hope so. I can't stand another few hours like this. This is the sickest I have ever felt. I just want to get some rest, but I can't when I feel like this. Ava says it must be much worse for me because I'm still alive. And she's right. I know that the transformation is almost complete, as I feel like a fog has come over my brain, and my vision is worsening. I can't wait for this to be over, because then Ava and I can finally become a real couple, and be intimate with one another. I know I'll look disgusting when this transformation is over, but that's all right. We can be together forever now. Just like in the movies. And there's another good thing. I won't have to buy a Halloween costume next year.